Okay, let's review the structures of the mammalian brain that we have seen from the wet specimen. So this time we're using the plastic brain model here, which will hopefully show you better the structures of the brain. So this would be the cerebral hemispheres with convolutions, the gyri, and the grooves would be the sulci. And this fissure here separating the hemispheres would be the longitudinal cerebral fissure, the median sulcus. And this one would be the little brain, the cerebellum, and this portion would be the medulla oblongata, part of the hindbrain, which transitions into the spinal cord. Let's turn to the ventral aspect of the brain. These two are the olfactory bulbs, carrying smell or olfactory information from the olfactory nerves coming from the nose, and then relaying it into the olfactory tracts. These two would be the olfactory tracts, and then sending those information to the pyriform lobes of the cerebral hemispheres. The pyriform lobes are separated or distinct from the rest of the cerebral hemispheres via rhinal fissure. And this region here, containing a bunch of structures, is the hypothalamus portion of the diencephalon. So this white stuff here that is forming an X would be the optic chiasma, which is the point of decussation or crossing of the two optic nerves coming from the eyes. And then once they've crossed the optic chiasma, they become the optic tracts. The optic tracts actually is connected to the thalamus, more dorsal to the hypothalamus. The thalamus, as I've said, is the sensory relay center of the brain. It receives many other sensory information from the body and then delivers it to the higher regions of the brain for further processing or storage. And then move more posteriorly, you'll see this bulge. That's a tubercinarium, from which hangs the pituitary gland, specifically the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, which is suspended by the infundibular stalk. And then the posterior portion there, which is almost indistinguishable from the tubercinarium, but move more posteriorly, that would be the mammillary body. Let's have a closer look. So that's the mammillary body. And you see these structures here, which in life would be highly vascularized. That would be the anterior perforated substance. And then this would be the cerebral peduncles. And then these are the hemispheres of the cerebellum. This is the worm of the cerebellum, or the vermis. And then this would be the pons. The pons and the cerebellum constitute the metencephalon of the hindbrain. The myencephalon of the hindbrain would be comprised of the medulla oblongata, this region here, which contains a lot of structures. These longitudinal structures here are the pyramids. These two lateral structures are the trapezoid bodies. And let's see what else. Okay, it is time now that we examine the cranial nerves. So emerging or entering into the olfactory bulbs would be the olfactory nerves. That's cranial nerve 1, olfactory nerve. It's a sensory nerve, receiving sensory information from the nose. Chemical signals, to be specific. Cranial nerve 2 corresponds to the optic nerve, receiving visual or light information from the eyes. This would be the 2 nerves here, entering the optic chiasma. Cranial nerve 3 is a motor nerve controlling the eyeballs, the movement of the eyeballs. This would be 2 structures here. It's cranial nerve 3 or the oculomotor nerve. Cranial nerve 4 is trochlear nerve, another motor nerve controlling the movement of the eyeball. And it's more dorsal usually. That white structure there, coming from the dorsal aspect of the brain, of the midbrain to be specific. That would be the trochlear nerve or cranial nerve 4. And let's skip to cranial nerve 6 because that's the third and last cranial nerve controlling the movement of the eyeball. That's cranial nerve 6, abducens nerve. It's ventral, better seen on the ventral aspect. And then we proceed to cranial nerve 5, the trigeminal nerve. It's a great nerve with lots of branches, ramifying various regions of the head. So this would be one branch of the trigeminous nerve. Trigeminous or trigeminal nerve. It's called trigeminal because it has 3 major trunks. Trigeminal nerve. The first trunk would be the ophthalmic branch of the trigeminus, innervating or receiving sensory impulses from the orbit region, like the eye region. The second would be the maxillary branch of the trigeminus, innervating and receiving sensory information from, for example, the upper jaws. And the third would be the mandibular branch of the trigeminus, receiving sensory information from the mandible. And this branch also has a motor function, meaning it can control the masticatory muscles of the mandible, like the masseter and the temporalis, allowing it to chew. So the trigeminus is a mixed type of nerve, has motor and sensory function, but primarily sensory in function. It's responsible for most of the sensations that you feel in the head region, like headaches or toothaches, for example. So blame the trigeminus for that. Trigeminus, cranial nerve 5. Next would be cranial nerve 7, because we have already examined or seen the abducens, cranial nerve 6. Cranial nerve 7 is facial nerve, just adjacent or posterior to the trigeminus. Facial nerve. Cranial nerve 7, facial nerve, as the name implies, also innervates the face. But in contrast to the trigeminus, whose job is mainly sensory, the facial nerve is the major motor nerve of the face, of the head region. So it controls the muscles of the face, for example, allowing you to smile or frown. And then cranial nerve 8 would be this nerves here. Auditory nerve, also called as vestibulocochlear nerve. It's a sensory nerve carrying sensory signals, information from the ears, allowing you to hear, and also from the vestibular system, which carries information about balance, sense of balance. And then cranial nerve 9 would be the glossopharyngeal nerve, another mixed type of nerve. So here, let's zoom this time, because cranial nerve 9 to 11 would be closely adjacent to each other. They're kind of like bundled together. So posterior to the Auditory nerve would be cranial nerve 9, glossopharyngeal, another mixed type of nerve having motor and sensory functions. So it can, for example, it's responsible for some of the general sensations of your tongue. What makes your tongue feel tactile signals from the food. And it also has a motor function because it's responsible for the gag reflex. The reason why when you kind of stimulate the backside of your tongue or pharynx, you begin to regurgitate what you've eaten. So that's the glossopharyngeal nerve. And then posterior to it would be the vagus nerve. Cranial nerve 10, my favorite nerve, important for a lot of physiological stuff, for general homeostasis, maintaining internal balance. We will dissect it in the cat actually, the cranial nerve 10, vagus nerve. It has sensorial and motor function as well. And then posterior to it would be cranial nerve 11, spinal accessory nerve. Has a motor function, innervates some of the shoulder muscles, like the trapezius muscles, allowing you to shrug your shoulders. And then lastly, cranial nerve 12 is the hypoglossal nerve, located ventral aspect of the brain. Hypoglossal nerve is also a motor nerve, specifically controlling the muscles of the tongue, allowing you to move it. Hypoglossal nerve. So those are the 12 cranial nerves of the mammalian brain.